Hello.
Hello, am I audible to you?
You are. How am I? You hear me?
There, entirely audible, and you sound good.
Great.
You look good in those stylish bracers. Oh,
In the which?
the bracers, the wristbands.
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Thank you. The what do you call them? Gauntlets. These are gauntlets.
Well, they'd have to cover the hands to be gauntlets, wouldn't they?
Oh, Jesus, you're right. You got me again with your your word knowledge.
You clever ways.
I would call those gauntlets. So really, so official gauntlet is only with the glove. I thought the gauntlet was like when you have those gloves that have the gauntlets, you call them gauntlets as well. But so it's only with the glove that it's officially a gauntlet. I didn't know.
Let me double check the term bracer. I just know it from Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, there's no way in this matter that I'm right and you're wrong.
No, don't ever assume that.
Well, just when it comes to words, I assume you know the words.
No, I mixed up stuff up all the time, and now getting on in years, it's entirely likely that I have my thoughts confused. A bracer, however, I do have in my mind right. Historical, a wrist guard. Excuse me, a wrist guard used in archery, fencing, and other sports. Historical, a portion of a suit of armor covering the arm, but specifically this region, the forearm.
Okay, so if you look up gauntlet, it is only with the glove.
Well, I mean, it's gonna indicate that it's for the hand.
Okay, you're right.
Let me double check though, lest I find myself mistaken. I will give you this. It is the part of a glove covering the wrist.
The very thing I said. Yes.
Yes, but it requires the glove.
That's true. You're right.
But you're doing better than I thought. That's an entirely plausible basis for this, and perhaps, God knows, maybe it's something over in Canada. You know,
well,
godless heathens that come from Canada. You never know what they're going to do to our language.
Yeah, we're well known for our gauntlets over there. But I mean, all this time, this is actually very pertinent to what we're talking about, because in my book that I've been writing, I have referred to the people are wearing stuff like this, and I refer to them as gauntlets. I'm gonna have to change that probably. You have this is an editing problem that has arisen like immediately, like within the first few seconds. My God.
Cool. That means my work here is done. See ya.
You'll have to edit the whole book for me. I'll have to.
Sorry.
All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about writing, because we've both written books and are probably writing. I'm sure you're writing more books. Are you?
As a matter of fact, this is my science fiction book, A Shameless Shill. That's nice. A Vinculum. You can find that on Amazon. And my book of poems, another Shameless Shill. This one is available on Amazon as well. Yes. And I've written a fair amount of nonfiction, and I've done editing work.
Yeah.
And the nonfiction that has been published, I should add. And not self-published as my poem and sci-fi book are. They were actually published by publishers. And some editing work. And my mother and father, my father's now dead, but my mother and father, both editors and writers. So yeah, and screenplays. I've written a number of screenplays, not a huge number, 3. One that was co-authored, got picked up and made into a movie that did rather well on the festival circuit and won some awards. And then, I've done a couple more of those on my own time that did not get made into movies.
Wow, this is a whole aspect to you I was not aware of. So dare I ask, what was the one that was made into the film, just in case, guy?
Well, yeah, good luck finding it. Because it did well on the festival circuit, but did not get picked up for distribution. Or maybe it did. Maybe it did. I don't know. His documentaries got picked up. It was at the Seattle International Film Festival. It got an honorable mention there, and some named category. And then the Los Angeles IFP Festival, it got the like a $60,000 or $70,000 prize, sponsored by, I think, Target, for best new feature or something. And then it was at the Stockholm and Torino festivals. The movie's called Crude.
Okay.
And it's set primarily in Turkey, but it's from some time back, probably 2000. 2003 or 2004. So
And
that was quite some time ago.
Is it, what's the, what type of fiction would you call it? Drama or?
It's about a couple of American tourists who get it in their heads, this idea to fake their kidnapping by terrorists in order to gain international attention and make money,
Right.
and everything that happens from there. But now that one I co-wrote, and I really my contribution to that was probably what got kept was probably the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then the other ones.
You're not kicking back, living off the royalties or anything. You didn't.
No, hell no. And then the other two screenplays I wrote that were not made into films, both are historical. One is adventure. One was horror, I guess you could say.
Wow, fascinating. So you've really written quite a bit then. So can I ask, the nonfiction that you say was published? Why do you not chill for those at all? I guess obviously you want to chill for the ones that you self-published. I can see the reasoning.
Right, because I actually make something from them.
Yeah.
The other ones I have mentioned on a number of occasions, particularly stuff related to semiotics. One is a book that I contributed to, helped write the introduction for, and helped edit. It's called Traditional Marking Systems. You can find that on Amazon. And I've also been, I got published by Elsevier in Language Sciences. That one you can find, I believe, through the Elsevier website. I can't even remember what the damn name of it is, but it's
I've never even heard of Elsevier.
Elsevier is, I think it's Dutch. It's an academic publishing concern that primarily gathers together academic writing and makes it available, at scale. So like when you find an academic paper online and you want to go read it, and then you go to this site and you have to pay someone in order to get at the paper. Elsevier's like that, except it's big and international.
Okay. Crazy.
Yeah, and what else? And then that's for academic. And I published in a journal called Remarks, RE:MARKS, and then so otherwise editing.
Okay, so the academics, was there anyone that you wrote solely yourself, or were you all kind of contributing to other things?
Contributing, editing. I mean, with the one Traditional Marking Systems, it has the whole first chapter is mine. But no, not an entire freestanding book. No.
So not only
I hope to change that here within the next year.
Right. Oh yeah, I'm sure you will. I mean, I'm sure you will.
I hope
but
so.
I know the publishers take a healthy chunk already. So, and then if you've co-written as well, whatever tiny percentage you're getting from them is obviously split as well. So.
Well, with academic works, yeah, there's good luck on that. There's
it's not worth it. Okay.
No, it's not. I'm not getting paid for either of them. You consider yourself lucky to be able to get the published credit as a contributor to a volume.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And so
it's not paying work. No.
Yeah, and that's sad. And can you republish the work you published that yourself? You could.
Yes, I can. The academic ones, I retain the rights to my sections. That is the one benefit of it not being some sort of paid arrangement. Well observed. And I will be republishing two of those in the book that I am working on, because what I'm working on now, sort of these things that have already been published form a basis for that thought. So I'll be including it there. Right.
Can I ask then? This is all just out of random anecdotal personal curiosity. Did they do well as far as they go academically? However, what kind of circles they sell in, or?
Yeah. After we published the first one, we got invited by someone who shares an interest in the subject, which is marks and signs, particularly in not limited exclusively to, but particularly non-linguistic marks and signs. Which is to say, things that generally archaeologists, anthropologists have a difficult time reading. Right. For example, they're not sure if they're letters. They can call it proto-writing. They can call it marks or symbols. And, it sort of opens up this gray area. That's the subject. Somebody came along and read the book. Was also a contributor to it. And we got invited to present in Sweden, and the co-contributor was a member of Swedish Parliament, so he got us digs inside the Swedish Parliament to host the conference. hosted in the Swedish Parliament, not by. I can't say it was officially some sort of state occurrence, but yeah, that worked out, and that led to a number of other invitations to present academic papers at conferences at universities. Leiden was one of them in the Netherlands. So it did well there. People were interested in it, but the circles are small. So, for example, the academic conferences, it was archaeologists primarily. And people, dealing with epigraphy, translation of, Egyptian or Babylonian texts, these kinds of things, that people were interested in the application of some of the thinking to areas in, for example, archaeology that that they confront. For example, it's not an inscription in the sense that you're going to figure out what the letters are and translate it. So say there's a quarry that they're exploring in Egypt, and there are a number of different stones that, stone marks that the stonemasons use in order to process blocks that are going to be cut and maybe floated downriver to some big ancient Egyptian building project, right? And so they have to figure out what the marks of the stonemasons from, say, 2000 BC meant, or how they were used. So some of the thinking that we did applied there, or it could be, the walls of Derbent on the Black Sea, built by Persians to keep out steppe invaders from the north. They've got masons' marks on the stones, or it could be cave art or cattle brands. So that kind of thing. But it's not. That's not like, oh, sign me up for the special work on masons' marks and cattle brands. So the short answer is,
I would like it, but
We had a little bit of there was a little bit of uptake of the ideas in very specific and narrow fields. So I guess you could call it academically a success, since the vast majority of papers that get published by quote unquote academics go into things like an Elsevier journal behind a paywall, or libraries are invited to purchase a copy that sits there and gathers dust because no one ever opens it. So some few people read it.
So it's purely for the love of knowledge and the furtherment of knowledge, really. And this is what led into your work that you do now. I've heard you talk a few times now about your ideas, a specific idea. I'm sure you're writing a book on it, I would guess. I think you probably
the Marx and Science and Semiotics for Nationalism.
How the Marx and Science predate language itself, or something, isn't it? Or predate?
Yes.
Yeah.
The basic idea being that people think that writing is something that has to come after speech, because writing is something that captures speech. And my basic idea is that writing came first.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, and that is amazing and fascinating. I'm not sure. I'd love to read it when it comes out. But I mean,
yes, indeed, you're going to hopefully live through it. There, you're standing in the cold weather again, clearly, because I'm seeing the clouds of your breath come out. So yeah, hopefully you won't die of hypothermia before I finish my book.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah, when I get really cold, I brought my pipe out. I'm smoking my pipe there, like just tobacco. That'll warm me up when I get really cold. But the stove is gone, but it's kind of like, it's not producing the heat like it should. I don't know what's going on. And it's kind of bad, like the smoke is coming out of it a bit. I think I got it, like it's either blocked or something. I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. But before I get sidetrailed about the stove, I was going to ask you about that. So this theory, like I read a little bit about, okay, this is totally off the topic, but whatever. You've obviously, when you say
some stuff,
you say so many interesting things, like we have to talk about a little bit. But so I read a little bit about spoken word, not spoken word. What do you call it? Oral tradition before language, or before writing. And it seemed to me, from what I read, anyways, that it was like, a long tradition. Obviously, Homer and the rest of it going, and well before that, the bardic tradition, reciting, remembering, speaking orally, remembering everything orally, and how it affected the ancient world. So your thing really turns it all upside down, I guess. Maybe since you're writing a book, maybe I shouldn't ask you, because maybe you don't want to just like give it away.
Except I did. But I'm not sure what the question is.
Okay, so why do you think that? Why do you think it was written first?
Well, because it depends on your definition of writing. If you define writing, as all the academics have done, as something that has to capture speech and encode it, so that it can then be interpreted or decoded and set forth again as speech, right? That's kind of the test, right? Can I look at my note card over here, and and this is actually a note of mine from on this subject for my book. It says, go back to what came before the book, before the religion of the book. Step over the text, right? Now, I'm not saying that this particular thing that I just read you is irrelevant. It's the fact that I can pick something up and reprocess this message that I wrote to myself and convert it back into speech. That's how writing is defined. And so, anything that they can't fit into that, they come up with this vague area that's negatively defined that they'll call like this semasiograms, or they'll call it proto-writing, right?
Yeah, go on.
So you see how they call it proto-writing because they can't figure it out, they can't read it, so they think it must be something that came before true writing, so it's proto-writing. Right. But in fact, it's a mark made in space, and that's what writing itself is. So if people think that writing is something visual, no. As Roy Harris pointed out, it's something spatial. If it wasn't spatial, then blind people couldn't read Braille. It doesn't require the eyes. It's lasting or fixed arrangements of characters in space. Right. So if you define it in that fashion, then it immediately becomes apparent to anyone with a brain that animals used and use fixed or relatively lasting configurations of marks in space in order to orient in their environment. They in fact read the environment. Yeah. They read the spoor of other animals that they track. They read bark scraped from trees. They read wallow spots. They read piles of scat that are dropped. And there's spatial marks that orient the animal in its environment. And we know that animals using those things to quote unquote read and quote unquote write in their environment predate human beings. Yeah, and conventional language, and therefore any writing that is used to capture that spoken language, it's manifestly the fact that writing must have, if as defined as I've done so, it must have come first.
Right. Yes, and I would agree. But I mean, I would also say not to. I don't want to argue. I totally, you know more than me, but that they would also have used noises and language as well, like dogs do, and to mark things.
Yes, but
so maybe it was simultaneous or something.
There is a degree. You can argue that there's parallel development, and I said writing comes before spoken language, because spoken language involves conventional meaning, and not that. Yes, so audible cries, and most of those very much spatial, right? In what they indicate, right? So you have a troop of monkeys or apes in the trees, and they're approached by another troop of monkeys or apes, and they begin to howl at their territorial perimeters to signal that there's a threat coming. Or like when a hawk comes down and a whole bunch of songbirds start to like raise a whole fuss that you hear. So the animals can orient in space. I mean, if you leave aside spoken language, you could have a group of warriors on the battlefield, and there are huge amounts of dust kicked up, so nobody can see anything. So they're actually chanting and like shouting at intervals, so that you can hear whether your line is straight or whether it's beginning to buckle inward under pressure from the enemy or whatever. Or if one wing gets too far ahead, it could be flanked and attacked. So you're signaling the people that you're dealing with in a nonverbal way that helps them to organize themselves in space. So you see how even the verbal aspects that I just mentioned, though not exclusively, they also have a spatial dimension and are used to orient people in space. So anyway, we're getting way off on this, but that's the basic idea.
But it's so fascinating. We have to just talk about it just a tiny bit more.
Well, it does bear, because we're about to jump to the subject of writing.
Well, obviously, yeah, exactly. And so what was I going to say about it? So the symbology and the symbols themselves and the spatial world evolved. It did evolve into language, and then that became the oral tradition, which was evolved into the bardic tradition and the passing of things, until there was like symbols and language became more codified
and could capture conventionalized speech.
Yeah. So until that complexity occurred, it was oral, even though
but see that part is misleading. It's Walter Ong who put forth the basic idea that is or he formulated it in the most recent academic way that most people are familiar with, this idea of the distinction between oral culture and written culture. Ong, O-N-G.
Was that Korean or something? Or?
No, he's an American Catholic, as I recall. I'm not sure of what descent. Yeah, okay, I don't know what the surname is, but it's a European surname. Okay. So I take issue with that as well, because take a look at someone like Homer, right?
Yeah.
And this idea that, you know, let's say 700 BC, let's say 1000 BC, depending on who you accept in terms of, you know, how far back that tradition comes from. The idea is that it's transmitted through speech or orally. But in reality, we have among the Greeks a tradition that is attested at least as far back as 500 BC or so. And that tradition is called the art of memory. And the art of memory was a way for rhetoricians, public speakers, but also scholars in general to fix images and, let us say, content more broadly, right? Sense impressions, to fix it within their memory. Now, the earliest forms of writing in Greece come from like round about 1300, 1200 BC in places like Mycenae and Cyprus, and most specifically, Cyprus, I believe. You may have it over in Crete as well. It's basically Linear A and more specifically Linear B. These were used to write Greek around like 1200 BC. And around about, I'm sorry, a little before that, and then around about 12 or 1100 BC, you have the cataclysm that hits the Eastern Mediterranean. You've probably heard of the Sea Peoples who supposedly descended on all these places. And we know about like the volcano at Thera or Santorini blowing up. And we know that for a whole period of several hundred years, the entire region sort of goes dark, like Greece, right? And then it reemerges, and we get the archaic and classical periods. And we have, you know, the rise of Greek writing. The earliest examples of that we have are like 700 BC. So I bring this up because writing appeared earlier, but then disappeared, and then appears again around 700 BC, 600 BC, right in there. Yeah. And then this art of memory that we have evidence of goes back at least to about 500 BC, somewhere in there, 500, maybe 550. So we have a tradition for remembering huge amounts of content, of writing, of ideas, of what you would call oral traditions.
Yeah.
And it's within 100 years or so of the emergence of writing.
Right.
And it's an established tradition, it seems.
Right. Yeah.
So the chances are very good that in our records of the art of memory that are attested as of about somewhere like 500, 600 BC, and the writing appears 700, 600 BC, somewhere right in there. And I could be off by 100 years or so in either direction because I haven't looked at this material in a while. But my point is that right around the time that we're first seeing writing appear in Greece, within a century or two, we see a tradition that's designed to allow you to remember things without writing.
Right.
And what is that tradition? It's the art of memory. What is the art of memory? It's the idea that you memorize buildings and physical space in your mind, and then you take objects and place them at intervals in the imagined space. And that imagined space then lends order to the concepts that you lay out, as well as the images themselves that are put in the places. That they help you to remember what it is you need to know. So one of the ways that they would
remembering things. Yeah. So in the same way that oral tradition works, well, it's all about memory then. It's all about encapsulating the past and projecting it into the future. Symbology.
Here's what's interesting is that how do they ensure that a thing gets remembered? Well, there are two things. There's the locus, the place, and in the tradition that's glossed as the loci, the places. And the places lend order to the material. The material itself, these are the images, or the images, the imago, or the imagines. So the way that they would teach it is that if you're a rhetoric student and you wanted to learn the art of memory, they would set you out in front of a temple, they would give you instructions to like walk around the temple and carefully commit all its features to memory. In order to do that, maybe you'd have to go late at night and walk around the outside, so that you weren't getting the noise and the fuss of the different people. But at any rate, you fix this memory of a building, which is a spatial structure in your mind, until it's so well fixed there that you can walk around through it. Then you place images in the places that are available, like, for example, between each column in a niche. Yeah. Now, those images are supposed to be emotionally striking so that you don't forget them. And then as you give your speech in rhetoric, you walk through the building in your mind. Back in the day in ancient Greece, you wouldn't have somebody like George Bush saying, "Make no mistake," and like looking at his little piece of paper and reading it. They would have to speak from the rostrum or wherever they were speaking to the public, and they would have to smoothly move through the different topics and remember all the parts of the speech they wanted to give. Now, I'm sorry, this is a long roundabout way of putting it, but the point is, once again, you have marks in space.
Right.
Just like in the outer world where you're following animal tracks on the ground to give you sequence and order and to sort of tell the story. Just like where, you put a property mark on the lintel of your house to know that you're passing under the mark of ownership as you enter this home. Just like an animal puts a piss mark on a tree, just like a person puts a brand mark on cattle, just like, or on a slave, or the marked hide that they will then take and trade. These marks establish ownership. They establish relationships, like marks on a boundary stone, or even signatures for people who are illiterate. They say, "Make your mark." Yeah. So you have a system within your mind that puts marks in space, just like what I talked about in terms of the writing that precedes conventional spoken language. And so we have at least one example. Now, this is just ancient Greece, and it's just in this one area, and there's a whole bunch of speculation involved. But we have at least one example from the ancient world of a way that people were trained to remember, that probably goes back a couple hundred years to the point where writing was just being rediscovered there in ancient Greece.
Yeah.
And that
are
tradition.
Are we?
Pardon me?
Are we talking about Homer here, or that tradition?
Well, Homer very likely existed either a little bit before writing reappeared, or well before, depending on who you ask. But here's my point: is that even the so-called oral system, because remember, you brought up oral and written, even the so-called oral system, we have evidence of how in the mind it's following the same rules of marks in space.
Yeah.
And even when we don't have evidence of that kind of a system, we can see with bards, we can see with skalds, we can see with the traditions of poets from the steppes, that there are other systems that they use to introduce order to the speech, most specifically meter, right, and rhyme.
Right.
So syllable counting, meter, and rhyme. Now that can only vary the speech signal, which is a sort of like a line, but more importantly, it's a sequence. It's a temporal sequence, and it creates its own set of relationships. But I think that is something a little bit more than just oral as well, especially when you start looking at the training of different groups in history for poetry.
Okay, now you're getting intense. Now you're getting intense.
Sorry. Anyway, and far off subject, but hey, man, you asked.
No, I did. No, and shit. I mean, God. I mean, and you can like really get down to it.
Well, yeah. So, if someone who really knew this stuff inside and out, they could, there are various points that I set forth that can easily be challenged. Many are debatable, but you get the basic idea.
In the Homer example, it is amazing that they would remember the Iliad and the events of the Iliad word for word for a very long time. Like the events of the Iliad were ancient to them as they are to us. I mean, you know what I mean? Like the actual events.
Yes. Well, I mean, look at Plato. I think I can't remember which one it's in. Is it in Phaedrus? Is it in? I can't remember, but basically, there's a famous story about how in ancient Egypt, I think it's Thutis comes and presents writing to the major god. Man, it's been so long since I looked at it. I'm screwing it all up. But basically, this guy shows up with a. Pardon me?
Osiris, is it, or what do you?
No. Here, let me go see Plato on the origins of writing.
Oh,
so I screw this up.
All right. In ancient
I think it's in. Yes, but Plato's talking about ancient Egypt from a Greek perspective.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I believe it's the Phaedrus. Well, yeah, it's in the Phaedrus. I just need the name of the people talking. Let me see here. Is it Thutis? Yes. Okay. I heard then that at Naucratis in Egypt was one of the ancient gods of that country. The one whose sacred bird is called the ibis, and the name of the god himself was Thuth. He it was who invented numbers and arithmetic and geometry and astronomy, also drafts and dice. Most important.
My God, we should be praying to this.
Right.
I do pray to him.
Most important of all letters. Now, the king of all Egypt at that time was Thamus. That's why I was. The king of Egypt at that time was the god Thamus, who lived in a great city in the upper region, which the Greeks called the Egyptian Thebes, and they called the god himself Ammon. To him came Thoth, to show his inventions, saying that they ought to be imparted to the other Egyptians. But Thamus asked what use there was in each, and as Thoth enumerated their uses, expressed praise or blame according as he approved or disapproved. The story goes that Thamus said many things to Thoth in praise or blame of the various arts, which it would take too long to repeat. But when they came to letters, quote, "This is the invention, O king," said Thoth. This invention, O king, said Thoth, will make the Egyptians wiser and will improve their memories, for it is an elixir of memory and wisdom that I have discovered. But Thamus replied, quote, "Most ingenious Thoth, one man has the ability to beget arts, but the ability to judge of their usefulness or harmfulness to their users belongs to another. And now you, who are the father of letters, have been led by your affection to ascribe to them a power the opposite of that which they really possess. For this invention will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. Their trusted writing, produced by external characters which are no part of themselves, will discourage the use of their own memory within them. You have invented not an elixir of memory, but of reminding, and you offer your pupils the appearance of wisdom, not true wisdom, for they will read many things without instruction, and will therefore seem to know many things, when they are for the most part ignorant and hard to get along with, since they are not wise, but only appear wise."
Wow, now that is amazing. And then maybe I've read it. I've read the Phaedrus, but I don't remember that. But I mean, Jesus, that is amazing. And God, the Thoth, the God of languages and writing, which I mean, obviously you should pray to. You're an acolyte of Thoth. And right. Sue is obviously the real pronunciation. You're obviously, I'm sure you've looked into that, and that's how you pronounce it. But
no, don't be sure. I have no idea. I mean, you have to go.
It looks to you like Zeus, or
it's Theuth.
Oh, well, I always see it spelled Thoth. Thoth.
Right, because that's probably how
God with the god of the harvest and the god of
it's the ibis head shown with a quill, right? The Egyptians, no doubt, the romanization is Thoth. When I say romanization, I mean putting it into the English letters we use, Thoth. Doubtless the scholars who figured out ancient Egyptian writing and have approximated the pronunciation think that is the closest to it, Thoth being Thoth. But remember,
we're not even talking about the subject here, but
this last part, I just want to finish this last part. Thoth
too amazing.
Is how an ancient Greek guy thought it was referred to. And so that's why you're hearing a difference. Because who knew that Plato could read hieroglyphs and knew that the name was actually Thoth? He writes it in ancient Greek in a way that we transcribe as Thoth. Awesome. But you'd have to ask a Greek specialist on that. I don't know. What the hell do I know?
Greek specialist. Well, aren't you part Greek or something? But
small part, yes. An eighth, I think. Yeah.
If we go according to Plato, though, so like that, what Plato said is, as usual, completely amazing, and at least part, and if not wholly true, probably, I mean, entirely true. But the trade-off would be with language, obviously, that without the hassle of having to remember everything all the time, memorize the Iliad and all the events of history, to be able to recite them and everything all the time,
or to have a person who does so, who can recite it for you. Because remember, true. even then, you had a special office and role of person who remembered such things. It wasn't everyone.
So you would say in a modern Platonic republic, we would have a person who has memorized the entire canon of biology, and someone who's, or you would be the person who has memorized the entire canon of semiotics, right? Is that the way it would work?
I don't know, because I can't remember a specific thing in the Republic, which I read again fairly recently, or for the first time fairly recently. I had only read it in part.
The convenience of language. Let's say the convenience of language removes the need for that, and so you have it for reference. So he's right in that you forget. But according to what Plato said, you'd have to remember everything all the time, and that the level of complexity we've reached does not allow that, or it does. I mean,
sure. And even in Plato's day and well before, they were writing things down. So like, especially things that really mattered, like Solon's code, right? On those revolving cylinders, their legal code. They'd seen obviously the Mesopotamian examples, and they had, hexameter inscriptions that commemorated some pronouncement of the Oracle of Delphi on, cast onto bronze votive tripods or whatever. So I mean, they were obviously using writing themselves, but they had a tradition, an idea. Certainly, Plato endorsed the idea that the memory had to be living within you and alive to matter. And whether or not you go so far as to imagine a society in which there was no writing, I mean, it's a thought experiment on Plato's part. Obviously, at that point, they had writing. But his point is that when it simply exists outside you, it's what we today call information. People are like, oh my God, we're just surrounded by information. There's information everywhere. But it doesn't live. It doesn't live in any of them, which means it has no reality in terms of the medieval idea of memory, which is the content of the soul that forms the basis for your ethical decisions.
But it's still, you have to admit, with this internet especially, we have this availability of recorded knowledge here and there, everywhere, and it has affected us. I mean, look at the stuff, look at the crazy shit we're talking about, and
sure, and it has helped, and it has like made a vast number of things accessible that wouldn't as quickly and easily have been accessible 10 years ago. Believe me, because I was here looking, and when you talk about 20 years ago, back when it was much harder to find things online, or you had to order books from the library through a loan program. But the problem is, it isn't truly fixed. This writing that we're looking at here actually quietly and subtly undergoes permutations. I joked about it in my little sci-fi book here. I have a thing called the New Jefferson Library, and I kind of satirically said books designed to meet the changing needs of readers as they arise.
That sounds good. That sounds like a good quality and true, and an idea that's going to come to pass even.
No, it has already. It's the idea that you can't trust the text because it's constantly modified. So you go to look at the text, but it's been updated to meet your changing needs as they arise, which means the meaning of the text is constantly modified to suit the political whims of those who want to read it a different way.
So they move the symbols. They move the piss marks, basically.
Yeah, which means you have disorientation in space, because your framework for orientation, so to speak, going back to the oldest form of writing, which I think is environmental marks, right? If you shift those marks around, it results in disorientation. It's like changing a landmark, right? If you go and take, like, for example, since I haven't read this text about Thuth or Thoth from the Phaedrus in several years, I could have come back to this and found that all across the internet, this text has been changed to be politically correct, and a few key terms have been changed to modify the sense. What I'm getting at is that these. Did you ever see The Dark Crystal?
Oh, of course, yeah.
And where the gelflings are coming in there to see writing for the first time, and they're like, "What is writing?" And somebody, words that stay, right?
What's funny is I thought about The Dark Crystal. This is a synchronicity or something, because I was thinking about that movie. It's something I haven't thought about like in many years. Right before we did this, because I was thinking of, what was I thinking of? For some reason, I was thinking of the little gelfling that gets the life sucked out of them into the vial, and the thing, and like he goes,
right, yeah, sure.
His eyes go white, and I was thinking of that for no reason out of the blue. I don't know why. Right before we did this. Anyways, go on. Sorry.
All I was going to say is that if the idea with the gelflings or gelflings is they say writing words that stay, except this digital shit. This is writing words that change.
Yeah.
So think about the idea of writing and text as a cultural anchor.
Okay, so
and
it's
then,
like our
and
own
then turn to this same text and recognize that these bastards can change it on the fly. That it's no longer stable. It's no longer fixed on a written page. It's on a screen.
They could have done that with the written page too, though. I mean, you could have just,
Yes, indeed, they had things where they changed it, or the text became corrupt over time. But it's not at this scale. Look,
No.
here's what happened when I worked in printing. If somebody screwed up on typesetting, the material that was then going to be printed, you ended up with 30,000 copies of something that were fucking wrong. And you owed a lot of money. When I worked with web developers and somebody got the text wrong, you know what they did? They said, give me just a second, man. Let me log in. I'll change it back.
Well, that's true, yeah. Because I actually worked at a book publishers myself, like years ago, in Vancouver. And it was before I was starting to work with them. But they had just beforehand published a book. And this is a publisher with many books. They published a book on Alzheimer's, and went through the entire process of, very closely. A true publisher, all the work that goes into a book, and they printed, was it 10 or 20,000 copies with Alzheimer's spelled wrong on the cover, which was hilarious.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
They printed stickers. They printed stickers and put them over top or something.
Right, because what else are you going to do? Yeah, that was hilarious, except for the guy whose fault that was. Yeah, that person probably filled his pants with shit rather quickly.
Who knows how to spell that fucking word? Who knows how to spell that fucking word? I mean, do you? I
can't remember if it's I
or E.
I can't. Yeah.
Who gives a shit?
But see, I would have checked.
You think someone would have checked? But yeah. So actually, okay. So let's, as utterly fascinating and a sinkhole of fascination as that is, let's disregard all of that. All the potential for history in the future that we will not talk about in disregarding, to stick somewhat to the topic. And okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you about anecdotally about your life is, how did you get picked up and chosen for these academic works that you did?
Oh, I had to fight my way in.
Did you?
And some of the editing, like I was on an academic mailing list. God, I don't even know if people much use those anymore, but you receive emails that go out to a group, and then you can respond to those groups by email. And I found out and went and joined one of them, that sort of Indo-European studies group, Indo-European languages, and related archaeology and all this sort of thing. So academics from India over to Ireland, and in that group, somebody came through indicating that they were working on a book on marks and signs, and were looking for contributions. And at that point, I had been invited to Kabardino-Balkaria in the Caucasus to come and give a paper, because part of my study of marks and signs, I was translating I'm still working on it. In fact, I was translating this Ottoman book, which is, I think, Ottoman Turkish from the 1860s, 1870s, because it's, well, I guess I should show you what it's all about. It's about marks and signs.
So what's that on the wall behind you? That's like it's
a embroidery from Tajikistan.
No, the uniform. When you went over,
yes, that's from the Caucasus too. Yes, this is a text of the people whose uniform that is, or clothing that is.
Wow.
And it's a collection of their clan and family marks.
Amazing.
But it was done in the 1860s while that culture was still traditional, or as it was just falling to Russian invasion. Right. And so captured in this document is a record of traditions that go back thousands of years on the steppes. So I was translating that. And
is there anything you've come across that you would, in the translation, may I ask, may I intercept you there and say, is there anything you came across that is like, arcane and mind-blowing? Or?
Yeah, cool old stories. Yeah, very, very cool old stories. And a few, odd little references here and there to as regards how these marks were used, how they served to organize societies that didn't have conventional writing, but did have marks, and therefore can't strictly be called oral because they used marks in space to organize their behavior and their memories. Anyway, we were talking about how I got in and was able to write on these things, and I had been translating that.
harassing people through the mail, basically, was it?
Through email and
Through email.
with groups. And so I submitted some of my thoughts and ideas to the guy who was editing that book, and he invited me on not only to contribute, but when it became clear that we had contributions from tons and tons of people who were from all different countries, and they were turning over these crap English translations.
Right.
The main editor, who was in Spain, needed a native English speaker to help with the editing.
Yeah.
So that started me in editing. Again, I have it in my family. But then, being in Turkey for many years, there were Turkish academics who were doing great, work, doctoral, postdoctoral, were getting published by big publishers like Brill. But they're not native English speakers, and they need someone to check that. And so I was the guy on the spot. You sort of make your own opportunities. So yeah, it's like how I got into graphic design and all the rest.
Graphic design. You were doing that. You were doing graphic design as well, right?
Yes, but once again, we're often Lala. So that's how I
let me ask you, how did you end up writing a book on marketing based on all of that, though?
On marketing?
Did you say you wrote a book? I'm wrong then. Sorry, I thought you said you wrote a book on marketing, or
no, marking.
Marking. Sorry, never mind.
Yes.
Never mind.
I was in marketing and advertising and branding for quite some time. That's another reason why I was interested in marks and signs, because of brand marks for my clients and customers, right?
No way.
They've got logos and insignia. And so I recognized that the horse brands and the property marks and the cattle marks and the hallmarks and the assayers marks and the banners and the heraldic signs are all related to the brand signs. But
you must have realized if you were in the world of graphic design, as I was, that it was not as it was. Let's say it was more like graphic design. What I remember from doing graphic design was just placing text over photographs, and very few would want a symbol of any kind, a lasting, You
mean like a Nike logo or a Microsoft logo or any company's logos?
I don't think they have any value as a marking. Those are like.
You don't think they have value? What do you think the Rolex logo is worth as an intellectual property?
I know it has that value, but
it has so much value that you can put it on a T-shirt.
It has the value of one single Egyptian hieroglyph. It does not have that kind of, let's say, bespoke, arcane, esoteric.
That's why it's
culturally relevant.
It's worth
striking.
Millions.
I know it is, but it's only because it's been shown over. There came a point when they realized through media that you can show something, as long as you show something on TV or over and over again, that's more the secret. That's why I don't give any relevance to modern graphic design. I just feel like it's
sure.
Branding is more about
limits.
Showing something over and over than it is about creating an actual something unique. Let's say, and definitely they avoid uniqueness. They want to imitate generically what was successful just before them.
Depends on the designer. Yes.
Well,
but you do see that. Certainly there's a lot of imitation. Absolutely there is. But my point is that there's enormous value associated with these things, which is why you can get hauled into court for trademark infringement. Or take another example, you have currency markings. If it's fiat currency, it's just a damn piece of paper. I mean, it might be an expensive piece of paper that's hard to tear, that'll survive being washed in a washing machine, but it's just a fucking piece of paper. Yeah. And yet what gives it its value? The fact that it has a particular type of mark placed on it. So from the clan or territorial sign to the mark on the banner that men will die for in order to protect that flag, so it doesn't touch the ground on a battlefield or the enemy doesn't carry it away, to marks on paper, the paper itself being valueless, will kill each other for suitcases full of marks on paper. They're just marks. All these marks, from logos to clan signs to heraldic insignia to tattoos on prisoners to marks on ingots of gold or silver, they're all related. And
I'm talking about value. I would say what I was saying is not the value, like the obvious material value of these things once they're established. It's more like, we don't want to talk about corporate logos for ages.
No, we don't. And the writing would be cool to talk about. Now, we could still get away with having covered this background, right? Because in some way it relates to what we're about to jump into, which is writing more strictly understood, which is the conversion of speech to a lasting form, whether it be for nonfiction, whether it be for fiction. And
Right.
we have a number of interesting dimensions because I talked about ancient rhetoric, which is
Right.
speech to convince.
Yep.
And you can think of nonfiction in many respects as like that because you advance an argument to present your case, right? On the other hand, you've got fiction, which helps one to pass the time, perhaps is edifying also, but stimulates the imagination and leads to engagement and immersion in the imagery or the fantasy.
Yes. Yes.
So we have an interesting background for this subject of how to write.
Right. Okay, we do. You've covered to an extreme degree the history of writing.
Yeah, of an entirely unnecessary degree. Yeah. So
Well,
sorry.
I mean, fascinating in extreme degree, which is So really, yeah, you are a kind of sage of this kind of thing.
I'm a sage. Yeah. Fuck off. I'm beginning to feel like a sage. I'm fucking old. Yeah.
Don't waste your time doing like logo design or whatever. So listen. So okay. So as far as what inspired you to write, it came through your parents. You were saying they were editors, and you grew up. Did you always want to write?
Yeah, I wrote my first poem, which absolutely awful in 5th grade or something, and I remember by 6th grade, I wanted to write because there was this fat uber nerd guy, total ginger-haired uber nerd, because I hung out with the nerds. You know, I carried my briefcase to school with all my D&D books in 5th grade, and 6th grade. By 6, I was an uber nerd, and there was another uber nerd there, and we bonded because he had written his first fantasy novel in 6th grade. It was called Dragonfire, and I was like, "Wow, you wrote a whole book! That must have taken like years." And I was at that point beginning to read, pulp science fiction and fantasy, Robert E. Howard and Michael Moorcock and stuff. So as a little kid, I really wanted to write a book, and I knew my mother and father had written and published a couple. So yeah.
So that was
sixth grade.
Yeah. Because I was the same. I remember being like a geeky kid playing D&D, but I remember, and probably similarly to you, when you really truly became a teenager, I remember sort of transferring over into like, we're both quite old now. So this is like, remember heavy metal and stuff. And like, it was like partying and heavy metal. I transitioned into that.
Yeah.
And with
women. I call that women.
With having a slightly intellectual or an imaginative background, that sort of aided my, exactly. And then women were like, or whatever.
Like, fuck this writing and role-playing game shit.
Yeah, it's like the jocks that formerly mocked you didn't know what the fuck was going on when you like became Mr. Cool Guy. And I mean, this sounds stupid for me to talk about. I mean, whatever. Like what? Because you had a wealth of I don't know, original, imaginative. Why can I say this word? I guess because I've been drinking. Dungeons and Dragons type shit.
Sure, and then they're nerd girls. I mean, and nerd girls are awesome too.
I mean, I remember getting lots of girls. And when I was in high school, I remember going almost directly from like total nerd to like, it was like muscle cars and girls and.
This is 0 to 60 in 10 seconds.
There was drugs. Drugs and heavy metal played a big part. And to this day, I'm a fan of these things. Although I don't, not a fan of drugs generally, like not social drugs like cocaine, but.
Right.
I made videos about psychedelics, and it's all
discretion. No, none of these things need publicly be mentioned. Yes.
Yeah, as long as you're psychologically testing yourself with psychedelics and like having an adventure, then I recommend that. But
I dig that. I remember being out there in high school. When you'd go out to a field and like a bunch of people would have a fire lit in some little area, and this chick comes walking up with dyed black hair with a boombox on her shoulder playing like Black Sabbath from Volume 4, wearing bell bottoms, and you're like, fucking yes.
Well, we're not that old. Bell bottoms, Jesus. I mean,
well, no, but we had a reintroduction of them at that point. So I'm not saying I was there for the original Sabbath phase in the 70s. I was very small.
Yeah, that was the years. It was more or less like that.
In the late 80s, though. In the late 80s, I was still into Black Sabbath, and I found those few people. I mean, I think the music that was popular at that point that most people were playing was Guns N' Roses, but there were still those who were in the know and would, bring their cassette of Black Sabbath and play it. Yes.
Yeah. So we've utterly digressed once again, but I mean, who cares? I mean, it's got to be. I mean, this is just.
Yeah, you could call this clip "Not About Writing," like parentheses "not" and then "about writing."
It's kind of about writing. So okay, so we went. How did we get into that? Like,
because we were talking about the earliest time that I wanted to write and
when
it was in school.
Yeah, sorry. So, and what's the first writing you did officially was nonfiction? Is that right? Or no? Or was the poetry? Probably the poetry.
Yeah, I started trying to write poems early and was absolutely awful at it until I started to get some traction in my mid-20s with sort of not writing something that made me want to puke.
Hey, do you want to hear listen to one of my first poems? It's actually pretty good. It's some kind of a mocking poem, or not mocking, but I'll just say it. The Pope is in the kitchen. The Pope is in your pants. He's made off with your girlfriend and took her soul to France. I think that's how it goes. What do you think?
The Pope is in the kitchen. The Pope is in your pants. He's made off with your girlfriend and gone away to France. Was it something like that?
That's it.
And that of what vintage is that? Did you write that last week or when you were a young lad?
When I was a young lad, and that was it.
Yes, mine was awful. I think the first
I still
one.
remember. I still think it's kind of funny.
I was in. I'm just not sure that the Pope is in my pants. Yeah, that's mine was. I was fifth grade, and I remember part of it. The wasted one who thinks he flies shall be put in darkness without eyes. The earth will rumble, the earth will crack. All things beautiful shall be black. The river of blood has run deep. The great god death grimfully reaps. The earth is gone, the world is dead. Light and darkness gleefully fled.
Oh, it's so teenage. It's
less. It's fifth grade. I was listening to too many Black Sabbath lyrics as a whatever.
Well, a good poetry should still rhyme. I mean, I often engage in non-rhyming poetry, and I appreciate it. But the best kind, I think, still rhymes.
Yeah, well, that was not the best kind. That was absolute shite doggerel. So let's just go ahead and clear that up. I was not presenting that as an example of quality. It was.
You've been a poetry fan your entire life, obviously, because you still. I mean, I've still seen videos where you like recite poetry and stuff.
Yeah, because it hit me. I was dating a chick who was an actress, whatever you want to call it.
Actress, please.
And
let us delineate.
Let's say actrix. And she had committed quite a bit, her plays to memory because she had to perform them. And I actually got to hear, live again around a campfire drinking, so to speak. I got to hear someone reciting Shakespeare live who was, a decent actress who had committed the lines to memory. And then I remember recited Ode to the West Wind by Shelley. And I was like, holy shit, wow, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, the lines. And it really struck me. I was like, wait a minute, there's this whole other dimension of poetry where it's spoken and heard,
right, rather
than simply, tasted in the mind through silent reading,
Right.
And so that lyrical aspect interested me, and the business of, meter, as we talked about, rhyme, all of that like added this other dimension of a puzzle.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good. Hold on. I once again, as before, I have to run out to the bathroom. I'll cut this out, and I'm going to throw some turf on the stove because I'm freezing. But I went out and I was like pissing on the grass in the garden there, and I looked down and I realized I was pissing on like one of the kids' toys. For God's sake, awful scene.
Yeah, that'd be a good one for a movie. You could work with that.
Yeah, a whole movie. That's the climax of the movie right there. It leads up to that, and then then I come back and stuff.
Well, a lot of the stuff about writing is just seizing those little vignettes and anecdotes and capturing them so that you remember them and use them for later.
We have captured it. And look at us capturing it on a something that is both. How would you say this? Because we're using language through zeros and ones to magically capture what we're saying, which we're speaking, but it's also everything at the same time, right? No,
it's multimedia. You remember that term, multimedia?
Oh, it's true.
It must be. It's. I mean, we've just gone beyond the CD-ROM. Yeah, total multimedia, man.
Well, it's pretty amazing in that sense. I mean, so it's both
absolutely.
at once. So we do have both at once for all it's worth in our declining, failing world. We have you know.
Absolutely, we've turned everything inside out after a fashion. Yes.
So what would you say about this then? Would you say this is more written or more spoken, or just both?
What's going on right now? This is
What us recording this through the language of coding and computers.
I'm not even going to hazard that, man. Okay. That's one of those things where within about 5 minutes I'd be like, oh my God, man, if I look at my thumbnail and that universe is a dude looking at his thumbnail, and then inside that dude's thumbnail is another dude looking at his thumbnail. Right.
You might destroy your worldview, and you just like
right, absolutely.
I've got to have nothing to say.
I've got to cling to what I have to keep the chaos at bay. Yeah.
Okay, so let's cling to the rough questions I wrote out for you. So what are we? Okay, so we covered your poetry, let's say, and that's all fascinating. I'm still fascinated by how you actually got into the nonfiction academic market, and so you were invited to the Swedish embassy and all the rest of it, just from like. Actually, no, I'm not that amazed by it, considering what you generally so just you knew you built up a vast wealth of personal knowledge through study. Personally.
Arguably, yeah.
Well, okay, no, it's obviously pretty good. I mean, pretty good, and you felt confident about it. That you
thrust my way into a conversation.
You thrust your way into academic conversations and became published.
Yeah. Which was also I had a chip on my shoulder about having dropped out of high school. So I was always like, fuck these people. I'll force my way in, screw their schools. So that was another psychological aspect of it.
Right. And was it through your parents and the rest that you became into semiotics, through the writing of your parents? Or?
No, that was, as I've told the story many times, the short version is I was already working in advertising with brands and logos. Like I said, I was at a friend's place. And I was in my late 20s, early 30s. No, I was right around 30. And he collected antique weapons and arms and armor. Absolutely brilliant stuff too. Beautiful things in his house. You're just chilling at his house, having a cup of coffee, smoking on the balcony. And he's like, "Hey man, check this out!" And he drops an 18th century Circassian helmet with aventail. It's basically it's kind of steel skull cap with chainmail hanging down, but it's heavily nielloed with yellow and engraved or chiseled brass plates and elements. And he throws it in my lap, and I'm looking at it, and there's a little signature of the maker, and then next to the signature of a maker is this crazy tiny little sign, and I'm like, "What's that? That doesn't look like Arabic." And he's like, "Oh, that's a damga or tamga." And I was like, "What's a tamga?" He's like, "That's a clan mark from the Caucasus." And so I'm looking at the clan mark on the helmet, and then above his balcony, he's got this Quebecois flag flying with the fleur de lis on it. And I'm like, wow, brands and branding, a Damga clan sign on this helmet, and the mark on the flag. And it was just kind of like, I want to find out what links these things. And so I remember
the exact moment. You remember the exact. That's funny. That's good. So let's I do want to ask you about. I know you weren't. You're happy to promote it, but when I asked you about it before, you weren't as keen on your science fiction, which is what I found most interesting, that you wrote a science fiction. I was compelled to write a science fiction. So why were you compelled to do it, and why are you not that keen to talk about it? Or
I was keen to write it because, as I told you, way back in 5th or 6th grade, I decided that I had to write some science fiction story, because I grew up reading Michael Moorcock, Robert E. Howard, Fritz Leiber, Roger Zelazny, and other authors who didn't stick in my mind as much, like Piers Anthony and the rest. But the core canon of Robert E. Howard and Moorcock and Leiber and Zelazny. So I always wanted to write a science fiction or a fantasy book. That's why. Yeah. I'm not as keen to talk about it because it was one of the first things that I started to write. Mm-hmm. It was not the first thing I finished.
Yeah.
So what happened was I made the newbie, amateur hour mistake of simply sitting down with an idea and quote unquote starting to write the story without having laid it out.
I did too, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that is a horror show. So
It takes forever. Yeah, it takes a million years.
well, I started writing it in like 1996.
Right.
And then it sat, and I got, probably 5 or 6 chapters in. And then I discovered, what the hell am I doing? I have no idea where this is going. This is like, blindly flailing in the darkness.
These are the series of realizations about such a thing that I wanted to talk about. That is most fascinating to me, because I realized the very same shit. But although I didn't start it as long ago as you,
Right.
I did start it. When did I start? No, a few years ago, 5 years ago. That's it. The idea, and like, you just think, okay, I'm just going to write this, and I'm just going to, smack it out.
Right.
Write it out. And the series of complications and hurdles you hit just quickly dawn on you, and even to the stage of right up to the end. Much more so, this is what I'm fascinated by a little bit personally, is the difference between writing the nonfiction and the fiction. And the nonfiction was much easier, I think, overall. Would you say?
Because there's the idea of outlining your argument and your conclusions, your thesis, your introduction, your concluding statements, your citations. There's a format or a formula that is much more easy for people to kind of get, usually because they have it hammered into them within an academic context. In the case of, my work on this book, as I said, I started in 1996. About a year and a half, 2 years in, I was a couple chapters, 5, 6 chapters, something like that. And then I just let it sit there because I was like, where the hell is this going? And I'm getting tired of coming up with a new idea and then having to go back and rewrite 15 things and reread it to figure out where I have to pull this or add that. And so I didn't return to it until around 2006. So 4 or 5 chapters in, the book's sitting there for 10 years.
Wow.
Now, here's the good news. In the meantime, I had taken up screenwriting.
Ooh.
And screenwriting is what I recommend for everyone if you want to write fiction. If you want to write
dialogue. The issue of presenting things in dialogue. Is that what you're going to say?
That's part of it.
Okay.
The other thing is that it's shorthand. It's the most clean. It's the most simple. It's the most streamlined, because you're supposed to be able to convey the setting, the circumstances, right? Like, it opens, title over, sitting on a park bench, looking out across the Hudson River. A man approaches from the right and sits on a park bench. It's the absolute minimum that's required to establish the scene. But it's everything that you do need, because it forms the basis of the most compelling stories we've ever seen told, through cinema.
Right.
But it's the absolute minimum. So the first thing is that you sweep all the bullshit off the table. The second thing is that there is a standard, which goes back far into history, like, this sort of the idea, maybe it's from Aristotle's Poetics, but in any case, it's a very ancient idea of these 3 acts or phases. And when I was studying the screenplays, one of the ways they explained it was Act 1, guy climbs up a tree. Act 2, people throw rocks at him while he's in the tree. Act 3, he successfully climbs down or falls out of it and dies. So it's the idea that you establish what's going to happen, you build the tension, and then there's a resolution, either comedy that's an overcoming or tragedy, which is succumbing to the slings and arrows. So you've got this very basic idea.
Let's not forget. Let's just dwell for a moment on the number 3 being the holy number in most religions, and 3 once again that's factored in. I have a personal theory about 3. Not only is it holy and has significance, but it must be 3 things, and one of the things must be slightly out of alignment with the other 2, and then you have perfection. And that's all I can say about it.
Well, you can see that represented with the 3 graces, but I'm not going to go, the doctrine of the Trinity. I mean, there are any number of places, or the gunas in esoteric Indian medicine,
or in the Viking religion, 9 was the holy number, but only because it was 3 times
3 times 3, right?
Yeah.
So yes, leaving it, or even the Wechen rule of 3, so mote it be. If you do something bad, it will come back on you 3 times over. If you do something,
so apply 3 to things in your life. Doesn't matter what it is.
There it is.
3
right? Or you and 2 girls. Yeah.
Well, no. Well,
when I was young, sure.
Yeah. I did that too.
A man could die of dehydration. So yeah,
it wasn't actually as amazing as one would think. I probably cut this out, but I remember it was like having sex, but there's two of them. Basically, is how I would describe it.
And a whole bunch of weird
It wasn't like
psychological.
watching it. It wasn't like watching it where it was like, it was just like kind of a hassle. In fact, it was like, I don't know.
Psychological subtexts and issues, yeah, and women being jealous with one another, yeah, and
well, afterwards, I was like, one of them was my girlfriend at the time, and when it was all said and done, it was like, you whore.
Oh, really? Wow, yeah.
I was done. I was like, forget that. Anyways, but
yes,
yeah.
I'll leave a neat pause. How do I start again? So with the business of the book, it had been sitting there for 10 years. But in the interim, remember, I just sat down and started writing because that's what you do is you start writing at the beginning and then you write until you get to the end. Durr, right? That's what I thought. It sat for 10 years. In the meantime, I'd studied writing screenplays, and I had learned the technique of taking boards and pinning up cards for ideas. So I'd have the card for scene one, I'd have the card that indicated what happened, and then I'd lay in little index cards for what happened in that scene. Right. But then when I decided that I wanted to change the structure, that it would work better like this or this, you just unpin the card and move it on your board to a new position. So basically what I learned was how to escape from the goddamn computer screen. Right. First off, you're following a line of text. If you're following a line of text, then you're right here and you go like this, and then you go like this, and then you go like this with your eye. You're trapped on a line because writing is much like speech, right? You have to wait for me to go before I can go ba.
But you do have to go back through it. Like the amount of times you have to reread the thing is the amazing hassle of it, right?
Right. I mean, and that's why you want to escape from that format at the outset. That's another reason to use these cards. Man, if you knew how many damn cards are all over my desk, because as a result of having studied screenplays, all I have are cards everywhere of everything, because I use them as a way to jot the idea down, but to escape from that line I was talking about. And remember, that line goes further. When you are writing in a word processing program, you're literally scrolling. Notice that word? You're scrolling up and down a long line.
You mean from a scroll? Is that what you're saying?
Like a scroll, which is just another way of these lines continuing forever. You're trapped in a goddamn line.
What do you call the end points of a line?
What I'm more concerned with is stepping outside of the line.
You call them points. This is Euclid. You call them points.
Well, you create a plane.
Yes, a plane.
And then you can look at that plane and organize and reorganize the elements of your story on it without being trapped up here like a horse with blinders on, scrolling, right? The first thing you have to do is free your mind, step back from it, and then you can see these, two cards that I've got can be in this relationship, or I can move them like this, or like this, or like this. Yeah. So in each one of these is a scene idea, or a crisis moment, or whatever. And so essentially what happens is you have the opportunity up on that big board to assemble and reassemble the elements without being trapped in the line, without being forced to go back and rewrite and reread. First, get it right. It's much like I learned about when I was studying dance. They'd say, with flamenco specifically, start strong and finish strong. You're never going to be able to control everything, but your opening has to be explosive and your closing has to be perfect. And I applied that in life. Yeah. If you're going to fuck up anywhere, do it in the middle. Right?
Yeah, and any weak point you can find. I mean, it's like this. What's the old adage? You're only as good as your weakest point, or whatever.
The chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Yeah, you just have to find it. You will have a weakest link in the end. So, and if it's terribly, terribly weak, it'll seriously weaken everything else that you've done.
Right, but if you, for example, are using these little tiny things, then essentially you've distilled your story before you've even started down to its simplest elements. And you've laid it out in physical space in such a fashion that you're not trapped on the line, you're not trapped by scrolling. You can look at these elements and how they relate, and then you can see, wow, does the beginning somehow answer the end? Do these two come together with a resolution? And then here's the most important part. The most important part. You doubtless know it, having completed a book. For anybody who's listening who hasn't done this, this is why I brought up you have to open strong and close strong. It's just like in relationships. When you meet your mate for a time, man, everybody's going to remember how you met. If you're going to break up, Everybody's going to remember how you parted ways, and that's your point, to like have it be strong again, open strong and close strong. Same with the story. You want somehow the beginning to touch the end and to make sense. And the idea is this is let me get this part out. I started writing this book years ago. I didn't know what the ending was going to be.
Right.
So I was flailing off into space.
Yeah.
And my point is that if you establish the ending from the outset, and you know exactly where the entire arc of the story is bending towards, then it's possible to write everything to reach that moment. Like think about that trick that George R.R. Martin, of whom I'm not particularly a great fan, but his writing craft is there, leaving aside.
I never read his book. I never read his book, so I don't know.
Well, put it like this: you've got Hodor.
I saw the show, but I didn't see.
You got a guy whose name is Hodor.
Yeah.
And at the end, he's like, hold the door. Right. If you didn't know that 4 books earlier, you couldn't have created that impact and quote unquote written towards it.
Right.
So you have to have an understanding of what the trajectory is going to be. And what I really want to emphasize is get out of the trap of scrolling up and down on the screen. Get out of the trap of sliding back and forth on the line. Here's where we'll come to what I talked about earlier. Remember, I said the original form of writing is marks in space. 3-dimensional space in which you orient. But because these people worship speech and think that writing is only an afterthought of speech, they're trapped on the line of speech, which is a sequence of syllables uttered in time. What I'm telling you to do and your viewers to do to get out on the board is to open the territory of your mind up, of your art of memory, so that you can see these buildings and shapes and structures of the story come to life in your mind. And you can escape the tedium of being trapped on the line. If anybody is interested in that idea, I have a clip in the Esoterica series called On Composition. And I specifically go over techniques for how to come up with ideas and lay them out in relationships. And that can be applied to, for example, psychoanalyzing yourself, just as well as it can be applied to gathering ideas for a story and laying them out in an outline.
Is psychoanalyzing yourself something you would practice that you feel is beneficial?
I wouldn't go so far. I probably shouldn't say psychoanalyzing, because that carries with it specifically the sense of psychoanalysis and Freud. But let us say getting in touch with things that are unconscious or subconscious, or resolving personal issues or understanding motivations. Yes, I believe doing that oneself is important.
Resolving personal issues. See, I have a kind of different view where I was set out in this world as a certain kind of animal with a certain background and a certain genealogical foundation, which was fixed. And even most of the events that happened to me were out of my control, have been and will continue to be out of my control. And there's only my reaction to them. This is very stoic, Marcus Aurelius, I guess. But really, this is more or less what I feel like. So I don't if you think of yourself outside of your simple reaction, your simple worries and your simple, reactions to pain or pleasure, let's say, and you truly step outside yourself, psychoanalysis, I always worry when I feel like there's delving into potential self-pity or blame, even when in fact most of the world and most of what happens to you is completely out of your control. And there's not only is there only your reaction, but it's how can I say, it's dependent upon your not being too concerned with yourself personally, and not just as an individual, let's say, but as when you recognize that everybody else is also such a person, and every living thing is such a person, and many will die miserably from the onset or later, torturously, and this and that, as well as every realm of pleasure and everything else. It's all not inconsequential, but this is my Neoplatonist learning that I feel applies to, is reason and rationality, and applying that in your life is like the ultimate thing you can do. So psychoanalysis, when I think of psychoanalysis, it's like looking at your past, looking at what's happened to you and thinking, this is my fault, that's not my fault, and attributing blame and
And perhaps shrugging off your own responsibility.
Yes, there's always responsibility. There's always virtue. There's virtue comes into it, but there's also virtue is changeable, and morals are changeable as well.
Well, now note that I stepped in and I said I'm not sure it was absolutely accurate to call it psychoanalysis because I don't mean specifically.
No, I don't. I didn't mean. I went on off on a stupid.
But to justify, you have patterns that get established in life. Like I found myself very early on in my early teenage years when I was starting to get active with women, that I would be in these arrangements where I had a close male friend. Right. And we would get involved in all kinds of permutations with him stealing my girlfriend or me stealing his girlfriend and how it's like screwed things up. Right. Right. And it was only when I got to about age 19 that I did some of these exercises. I wrote down all the girlfriends I'd ever had. And I kind of summarized as little diagrams, the gambits or little archetypal arrangements that were formed based on me, a single male friend, and this female. And I'd be like, okay, in this case, I cheated on her and did tell her. In this case, she cheated on me and didn't tell me. And I began to see that there was a repeated pattern.
Okay. Right.
And I said, well, wait a minute. It's always two males trying to get the attention of this female. And it creates all these issues between the two males. And then sitting there meditating upon it, I said, wait a minute. I'm fucking a guy with one brother who was raised by a single mother. The brother is older. So my brother would have, quote unquote, been with my mother longer than me. And yet I showed up and would have to have the attention of the mother and would try to take it away from my older brother.
That's very Freudian now. That's very Freudian. To think of
absolutely,
of that but I'm relationship. That's different. You can't relate family things. Family is all important. And
except that I did relate it and it clicked for me and shed light upon that unconscious pattern that I was embodying over and over again.
Jealousy, basically. Jealousy, you're saying, is it? Or
jealousy, but an unconscious pattern that had been established that I then repeated over time because I would not see it. But once I saw it, it lost all its power over me. It's like learning in the old tradition about magic.
Okay. So this is your defense of psychoanalysis. Yeah.
Well, but not strictly, because I'd throw Reich and Adler and Freud and Jung and some more shit too into that bucket. It's not just, because remember, psychoanalysis is Freud's deal. Depth psychology is another way.
Jung was big into it, and Jung was pretty clever. I always like, people would complain about Jung, but I kind of like what he had to say. And even I was hooked on synchronicity at the beginning of this when you
indeed. That's a Jungian concept.
The dark crystal. Yes. Synchronicity when it happens is very odd. Like even so there's this example right now of the dark crystal, let's say, but even the other day I was randomly browsing through YouTube or whatever the fuck I was doing, and I came across a clip from The Naked Lunch. Remember that movie? Oh no, not Naked Lunch. What's the show with the Canadian actor with the white hair, Naked something or other, and he was like a comedian and he was like a cop, and he was like, it was produced by the Zucker brothers.
I don't know. I never watched anything Canadian.
What the fuck is it called? There's a famous scene which is actually
The Naked Gun.
That's it. Like I was thinking of the scene where
that's Canadian.
The woman who was married to Elvis walks up some ladder, and he goes, "Nice beaver," looking up her skirt, and she passes down like a stuffed beaver. But what was my point about it? Oh yeah, so in that movie, I came across some clip from that movie where they're driving, and they point out there's something in your country where I don't know what the fuck it is. It's two like giant cement mounds with a giant, looks like an iron nipple on them. It's some kind of, I don't know what the fuck it is, water reservoir or some architectural thing by the side of the road. And they drive by it and he goes, look, boobs, or, some stupid fucking joke. Right. And I'm watching and that occurred. And just later, like as random and this thing in your country, this two buildings that look like boobs. Later that day, I watched some other random horror movie, and there it was again. This two buildings. I'll send you these clips so you know what I'm talking about and how random and stupid it is.
And yet, it seemed to be
there. They were. That same fucking day. There's the building with the boobs that look like boobs.
Well, the young women would turn immediately to you and say, "Everything happens for a reason." which which I don't
It's just
necessarily endorse.
That's the nature of synchronicity in according to Jung, and is that it's bizarre. It doesn't make when it happens, it does not make sense. You note it in your mind. You think that's very odd that I that I thought of the dark crystal moments before talking to you for the first time in many years, and you brought it up. Although that's not that extreme an example, let's say, but
the fine hand of the Gelfling.
Yeah, yes. But it's something that is. It's always got to be something that is bizarre and stupid. That you can't like grasp onto it. It means something. It's like some fucking stupid thing that doesn't make any sense.
Yes, something unites these seemingly disconnected temporal features. Well, if I may step in to relate this to writing and composition again, you can see how we in the narrative timeline of our lives have these moments where we feel we've stepped out of the line that I've been referring to all this time, the line of sequence, the line of duration. We feel as though momentarily we've been taken up to the top of the mountain, and we can see because we notice the occurrence of Gelfling twice, right? We see this damn construction of concrete with nipples on top.
Why?
Right, but we feel as though suddenly we're not looking at the line of text. We can instead see the board of the architect, whereon these scenes were first laid out, wherein the final scene almost touches shoulders to the first scene. So it's instead of a line, it might be like we think of a dream and we're like, wow, man, the end of Yes, Act 1, 2, and 3, there's some overarching order and fate and trajectory, or it could be that it feels like in a dream where you come to the end of your dream, but when you wake up, you're like, wow, it was the end of the dream, but it was also the beginning of the dream, which was also the end of the dream, but the end of the dream was really the beginning of the dream because I came back to the beginning of the dream, and you're trying to think about it in your mind and understand the order behind it. Well, one of the sort of metaphysical aspects of writing is that it's an opportunity for us to step outside the line of sequence here in our imagination. The imagination in which these stories take life or shape, or in which academic ideas get explored and sort of hammered and tested, or like, Tesla would build inventions in his mind and test them there, so to speak. We are free of time. If I want to know what happens tomorrow in the meat, I've got to sit here and wait until whatever happens tomorrow. But in my imagination, or even arguably in Henri Corbin's sense, in the imaginal, which is something a bit different than the imagination, I can, let us say it has a more of an ontological claim. It is more real than what we think of as imagination. We think of the imagination as unreal. For Corbin, the imaginal is something that is much like the imagination, and yet it is ontologically prior to everything that we witness and experience here. So think of imagination as a place that is more real than here, and that's the imaginal. But anyway, the point is, because we're talking about writing,
right,
in this specific sense of psychoanalysis or synchronicity or stepping outside the line of sequence, by going through the act of composition, we participate in a sort of omniscient, omnipotent view. We can see all things that will happen because we create them, and we're all powerful. We can create or unmake characters. We can, give birth to them or bring them down with a sword stroke, so to speak. You can even leave the reader in tears later. And so that's why I brought up the thing about imagination. If I want to see what's going to happen tomorrow in my flesh, I've got to sit here and literally wait until tomorrow. But in my imagination, I can throw that loop. I can step outside the line. I can reach forward or backwards. And so that's sort of the idea of the novelist as someone who can create a self-contained world in which all sorts of ideas and themes can be experimented with and understood.
Well, this is why I want to talk. This is why I want to talk more specifically about, say, science fiction or fantasy, because to me it is, and it's from a quote I read somewhere else from somebody else, like a long time ago, who said it was the ultimate form of fiction. Because you have your obviously Dostoevsky and so forth that we are not, which will speak to the more innate, intellectual human concerns and underpinnings, and then say you will generally get to in fantasy or science fiction.
Right, and he's a kind of pioneer of the quote unquote psychological novel too. So
true, yeah. But but sci-fi has a certain people don't think of it in relation to Dostoevsky, let's say.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the point I'm thinking of from this guy is that it is actually the ultimate form of fiction, because you are not only creating. Dostoevsky is working within, a certain period in Russia. We are, not we. Well, we did, and others.
Indeed, we, comrade.
You create a world out of nothing, right?
Absolutely. It is speculative fiction. It is not science fiction.
The basis of it, every little element of it is utterly fabricated and created in your mind by pure imagination all the way through, so that you can say or do almost anything you want. You can introduce anything.
The time machine. You can have the LOI and or you can have 20,000 leagues under the sea. Sure, you can do anything. You can go anywhere. You could fly to the moon. You can be a robot.
Well, no, but honestly though, I mean, it sounds cheesy, man.
No. I'm playing, but you're right.
Yeah, it is like pure imagination in both those cases. So beyond, it's like a lot of people get caught up in fiction that is, historic fiction or contemporary, a modern event, which think a certain way. It's more that they can't. Not that they're limited, or they've chosen to do so for those reasons. But it's compared to like total fiction, where you're inventing the reasons and the groundwork of the world itself. You can change physics. You can change anything you want. You can introduce gods. You can introduce anything. So it's beyond completely a conceivable notion to someone who's so accustomed to attributed symbols, let's say, like your symbols, but has become so normalized by them that they can't conceive of things. Those type of people are not a fan of fantasy and science fiction. I don't think generally.
No, it's our wise overlords who seem to like it the most, because we're down here at the bottom of the food chain, where we have to indulge our fantasies about how the world could be through the private act of writing. And then maybe we get lucky, we get some traction. People like the words and letters. They like our stories. We gain a name. We begin to sell, like a Robert E. Howard or whatever. But the people at the top of the food chain, they're engaging in the exact same exercise that you're talking about here, except they get to go out in the world and actually present these ideas. And like you said, fix people's perceptions and attitudes based on symbols. They're all frustrated writers, and they're shitty writers.
Plans that are developed by people that are caught in a mindset of a group mentality, of a certain, mentality. Let's say, if you're trapped in a certain ontological or underpinning view of the world, you will create worlds out of that follow those laws that you have for yourself. So
sure. And indeed, these things shape how we as writers create our world. And you've sort of touched on the way in which it can be a kind of therapy for the writer, because if, for example, I can take the Klaus Schwabs of the world and burn them in lakes of fire in my fiction.
Yeah, but those people have false or easy views of the world that are just tangibly, like at their basis, like fearful and silly, let's say. And so everything they create is ultimately just a shambles. And most people can even sense that, but it may work temporarily in a kind of social sense because
it's imposed and it'll last for a little while, as long as they, top down.
The nature of the social Western world at the moment is pretty like
ass in the air and dilated.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, just the culture has steered itself in this way that it's, and it's not just the Western world. I mean, I see evidence of it around the world, which is funny, because as far as this sort of thing that we're talking about that we shouldn't be talking about goes, it kind of seems to be. I always wonder: is it Spenglerian? Is it inevitable, or is it, certain forces at work that you can combat, or is it something that has to see its way through, like the Kali Yuga, where you go into it, inevitably and survive it, and that's all you can do is survive it, and it's
or some combination of the above.
Yeah, the tidal wave forces at work. It's like a certain viewpoint that gets introduced opens a tidal wave of just pointless, stupid viewpoints that are just obscene and but it washes over everything, literally like a tsunami. You know what I mean? And it seems like that, and that itself creates another tsunami of some other fucking stupid thing.
Yes, and once it's in motion, it will never cease to it's turmoil. Yeah,
well,
but the main point that I wanted to put is that what is it? there's actually a line that fits it perfectly from Hamlet, right? He says, what is it? I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king of infinite space. So if you take a look at skull, which is actually, as I recall, etymologically related, don't quote me because I haven't looked recently, but I believe skull is etymologically related to both skill and shell.
Really?
Yeah. And so when you think of nutshell and shell being related to skill and skull, you have the idea of I could be bounded by my skull and count myself king of infinite space, in the sense that in this imaginal realm, or perhaps merely imaginary realm, we don't have to be the Klaus Schwabs and the Davos jet-setting dickweeds of the world. Each of us, however modest our means and circumstances, can for a moment be bounded in a nutshell and yet count myself king of infinite space, even though in that same play we see the whole soliloquy with, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well, and he's looking at the skull.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and don't
so
answer
as a writer,
yeah.
just to close that thought, as a writer, we have the potential to participate in sort of our own little miniature acts of creation. Anyway.
That's why I believe of writing is the ultimate art, and I thought so. That's also a quote from somebody else that I also have believed for some time, because you're creating a world, and its influence. Like Shakespeare is a great example. Like, Homer, Shakespeare. When this goes somewhat against your. No, it doesn't. It goes in line with your book theme of symbols are more important than spoken word, I guess. But that writing is. That much as far as the arts go, it's the most influential, even though pictures are more immediately influential, paintings and memes and things like that. But writing is the more serious. Your ideas, your personality are recorded and imbibed.
But you have don't forget, you've got the what is it, Ut Pictura Poesis or whatever. What's that from? I think that's from Horace. Let me just get the right. That's what is it? As is painting. If
the writing is the most important of the arts, as I'm suggesting, then your imagination is a vital tool in directing culture and in suggesting ideas,
and testing inventions.
Nothing.
Yes,
intentions,
we've got the inventions. Indeed, you can test intentions as well. It's a framework for ethical. So to speak, experiment, but we also talked about Tesla testing things as well in his mind. You can actually sit there and build a machine if your imagination is up to the task, is acute enough and capable enough. You can build the machine and test it, and go through prototype phases without ever having to touch physical material, being that much more far ahead. Likewise, you can ethically build circumstances or arrangements in order to understand them.
Yeah.
Either retrospectively, as I did in the case of the diagram with my former girlfriends, attempting to unpuzzle what was going on, or in future to make a better ethical decision, to be like, no, I don't have to get involved in some sort of stupid adolescent cheating arrangement with my best friend and this girl who I think is attractive, because now I understand where it came from, and I don't have to unconsciously repeat that behavior. But I want to come back to the business of we were talking about the business of the mind being a place in which things can be tested. But I wanted to come back to your thing. You had mentioned writing is, the highest of these arts,
highest of the arts. Yes, it is the highest of the arts.
And you were talking about images and imagery is something a little bit different. And I mentioned the line from Horace.
Images being more impactful, I would say, immediately impactful, but not as over revolutionary or long lasting as reading a book.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and pretend I didn't hear that evil word, impactful. But
that's a non-word, is it?
Impactful. Just, you could say striking. You can say
okay.
There are all kinds of existing words that don't have to be that barbarous. This is asinine of me, by the way. Feel free to just press the delete on this discussion now for being such an asshole to give you a hard time about impactful.
It's the nature of your ingenious, artistic genius.
I cannot resist it. But there's the old line from Horace, and it's Ut Pictura Poesis, which is, as is painting, so is poetry. And there's another sort of formulation of it that comes from Giordano Bruno, where he says poets, painters, and philosophers are one. Of course, all those groups express themselves through words spoken and written. And the point of this in saying that, as is painting, so is poetry, or poets, painters, philosophers, and philosophers are one, whether it's Bruno or Horace, and these concepts are quite distinctly intertwined. It's that the image precedes all of them. So think of it as the imaginal, or think of me giving a speech, to come back to these other elements that were like knitting together from earlier in our conversation. So I'm a rhetorician who's going to give a speech, right? I'm Demosthenes, and I'm going to be declaiming some topic before the people of Athens in the, whatever, I don't know, 4th century, whenever he was around. 5th century, maybe, I can't recall. He's going to get up and give a speech. Well, he's going to move, given the art of memory training for the rhetoric, through buildings that he's imagined in his mind, and he will place images in the places of those buildings, and the order that he moves through the building and passes the images he's memorized lends order to the spoken word and allows him to capture what he's going to be talking about. If I'm a poet, and I'm, I have a central image, like one of them I wrote, I remember popping a tick as a kid, and it burst between my fingernails and left this little red spot, right? So if I write heartbreak, what is it? Like a tick pop between two bloody fingernails. When you finally feel you can talk about it, there's nothing left to say, right? So you have a central image. There's nothing smaller and more sort of just nasty and insignificant than a tick. And so to pop a tick between your fingernails.
They're tough little fuckers.
Yes, they're hard. But when
I remember like smashing one with a rock, and it was still not exploding. Like,
right, but if they're very full, right? Mm-hmm. If they're full of blood.
European ticks, by the way, are not the same as North America. North America, European ticks are little tiny black dots, and you have a little like red spot on your flesh and a little black dot, and it's very
much smaller, right?
I guess the North American tick is a fucking son of a bitch.
Complete with Lyme's disease, and some have even argued that's a bioweapon. But I'm not going into Lyme's disease land. All I wanted to capture was this idea that you have a central image. So in the idea of heartbreak, like a tick pop between two fingernails, right? When you blood on your fingernail. God, I'm just ruining the fucking poem. It's my own goddamn poem, and I can't even remember.
I screwed it up. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's my fault.
It's a good analogy. It's a good metaphor. But
the point about the metaphor is that the image precedes the words. There is it. Sorry, heartbreak, like a fat tick burst between two bloody fingernails. When you finally feel you can talk about it, there's nothing left to say. Well, that's the whole thing about heartbroken, the relationship's over, and the rest. But you see how there's a key image, and it can be unpacked in a bunch of ways. It's the idea of bursting the tick. And a tick is full of blood, and it leaves a tiny little minuscule red stain as though you've gotten rid of vermin. But think about the idea that tick that is popped between two bloody fingernails, those two being the two parties who are now in falling apart as a relationship, right? And you've been tossed aside by the one party like a popped tick, and your heart that was full of passion and blood is what has been popped, right? And yet somehow it's so insignificant, and yet it was utterly destructive to the creature. And then the closing lines are, when you finally feel you can talk about it, there's nothing left to say. It's just a smeared thing of blood that you wipe off on your shirt, right? That's me, trying to gin up support for my brilliant poem. The point, however, more significantly, is that an image lies behind it.
Right.
An image. And behind science fiction and fantasy writing, very often behind philosophical works. I mean, not just your philosophers who are more explicitly tied to imagery and poetry. Somebody like Nietzsche, who's considered very much a philosopher who was also highly aesthetic, and writes things like
most of the real ones were.
Right, you have famous images like we just talked about this, like thus spake Zarathustra, with dwarfs walking on tightropes and shit, or you have the story that we opened with from the Phaedrus, right, where Thoth is bringing his prize writing and setting it before the god.
Thoth and not fucking Thuth or whatever you're saying before, man.
Right, Thuth and Thoth and famous.
I'm glad you called him Thoth, but yeah.
So the image underpins all of it. So can you really call it writing when the one thing that is universal across all of these is the image that lies behind it?
Okay, that's true. But the writing is the symbology which conjures the image, and and you can write things in context which is seemingly brilliant, or you can be Wordsworth, or you can be, nobody and write shite.
Right, but even for you, it may capture the moment. Like one of the greatest poets ever in English is John Donne, right? And he's Go and Catch a Falling Star. He's got all these wonderful fucking poems. A Valediction Forbidding Mourning or Satire of Religion. They're absolutely fantastic.
It only has context if you first of all speak English and can appreciate his view of the world, and
the style you pointed out. But what I wanted to say is his epitaph, as I've told, I haven't confirmed it, but apparently what he put on his gravestone is undone. His name is John Donne. And this incredible poet, as his closing remark, just put undone.
It sounds a bit nihilist and lame. It sounds like he was like...
That's not nihilist and lame. That's wry, and it's funny. And it has
if it's funny, maybe
brevity is the soul of wit.
And kind of like, whatever. But you're right. Maybe he's just like wry and. Frankly, I'm not impressed. It could be better. I'd rather something more eloquent. I like the old "as I am now, soon you shall be" kind of shit. I like that. I like the Roman epitaphs. Roman epitaphs are the most tear-wrenching things you will ever fucking read. Not like even the ones about their animals, let alone the actual ones themselves. Like. They just like, because they say it plainly. They say they'll say, "This is the epitaph of my slave, whatever her name was. She was white of breast and sweet," or something. And it would be like, okay, and I'll miss her forever. Like I can't do this justice. It sounds like shit the way I'm saying it. I'm sorry, but they just kind of like say things in like plain little blocks. At least in translation. I don't know the Latin.
Not plain.
Okay, not plain, but like, what's the word? Expressive, short sentences that encompass something you wouldn't even like normally think of to say. You know what I mean?
Right, but what could be more laconic than undone? It's 2 syllables, and one of them is his damn name. It's like,
Hey, I just thought of my other Pope poem. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
My other classic Pope poem. This is when I was a kid. What was it? It was the Pope has come to dinner. He's eaten all the pork. He's made out with my wife and stabbed me with a fork. No?
That's it?
That's it.
And what's up with the Pope poems? I didn't even think you had Catholics in Orthodox. I mean, outside of Quebec, do you even have Catholics in Canada?
I just thought it was funny. I just thought it was funny.
But why twice now, the Pope?
But he's like, come to dinner, and he stabbed me with a fork.
So he's a character for you, the Pope.
He's
a recurring. He has walk-on performances in your poetry. The Pope does.
Yeah, he like comes over to the house and he like makes out with your woman and he stabs you or something, and it's the Pope. He's not supposed to do it.
So he's kind of like your foil character. I get it. Okay.
No. This is like juvenile, stupid. I'm looking for rhymes. I'm looking for humor. Back in those days, when I was writing poetry.
I guess Pope rhymes are dope.
If I was to write poetry now,
dope with the Pope.
It's okay. So like my book I've written now, let's say. So this is why I do want to touch on again about how science fiction and fantasy is the ultimate form of fiction, even though it's made out to be juvenile and everyone just mocks it like, fucking juvenile.
Right. Fucking.
When they criticize it, they're just like, it's okay. I don't believe this is like I have an Irish uncle here. He went to the like a really old Irish guy, old school. He went to the Lord of the Rings movies. And he said, what was it? He came out of it, and his response was, I didn't like it. I don't believe a word of it. I was like, well, it's not meant to be taken literally. He did not even conceive you would like make up of a world in a story, like out of nothing sort of thing. You know what I mean? I don't remember what my point was.
They're a tough audience, the Irish. It puts me in mind of that joke about the one who finds the fly in his beer and seizes the fly and lifts it out of the beer and looks straight at it and says, "Spit it out, you bastard." Sorry. My jokes aren't funny either.
I did. You mentioned archaeology when you were talking about your book earlier, and I actually did a stint of archaeology here. not that long ago, only because it was near to the house. There was an Iron Age ring fort, and then I lied. I didn't, not like you did. I actually lied my way into. Well, not I didn't lie. I sort of, let's say, I exaggerated my resume. Not that it mattered. It was the pay was fuck all. It was only because it was right near my house, and I was like had the time that I got involved in this dig, let's say. And also, I'm actually quite strong. So, and like, lo and behold, most of archaeology is fucking digging. Like, you're just digging all day, spade in the ground, boom, all
digging
day.
with strings. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually felt, I know there was all these kids from like around Europe that had come to this dig, and I actually
and you're like, you pussies can't dig. I'll show you how to dig.
No, but they've been studying for 4 years and like thinking they're like, scholars, and like here we are, and I'm just some fucking asshole from up the road. And I'm just like, and I could dig better. I could actually, not only could I dig better than them, I could do the, you have to do the, what's it called? So everywhere around Ireland, there's ring forts, right? This was an Iron Age ring forts.
It's a big Celt thing.
In the old days, they would, do you know about this?
I know a little bit about ring forts. I mean, I've seen them in Galicia. Yeah.
Well, your family, or not your family, but your community would make they would dig a ring, a perfect circle around an area of ground, dig it out, and it would be like the defense of where you lived, and within that circle, then you would have your farm animals in your little community. So you'd have a bridge over the moat, over the hole, but as well, it seemed that they would sort of throw their. I don't know if they were throwing their. Because I'm not an archaeologist, even though I worked on the site and I was digging up these bones. I still can't remember now. Also, I'm kind of pissed right now, but there was animal bones. There was tons of, and in the ditch itself, there was tons of like big animal bones. Cows. Well,
there's an old tradition of them throwing offal and stuff over the walls, so maybe it's like that. Yeah. In the case of Mesopotamia, it went on so long that it created floating little towns, but yeah.
Yeah, in the ditch itself, you found a lot of that. But the section, that's what it's called. I was better than the archaeology students at making the section where you had to you came to the end of the ditch and you had to make with your trowel, you make the perfect little square of the dirt, and you looked at where the layers of dirt had done this and that. You would find this fascinating. I don't know did you ever do it?
No, never got involved personally with a dig.
In Ireland, we mostly found skeletons. We found not from the fort, but later on they came back with there was a early medieval graveyard that they obviously remembered the fort as like a sacred place, and they came back and buried a whole bunch of skeletons, graves. So then we were digging out these you would find mother skeletons with a baby buried together and stuff like that.
Did they still have any kind of rot smell associated with them as you broke the soil around the bodies?
No, there was no smell.
Just smelled like dirt. Yeah,
it was like very early medieval. But I'll tell you another thing. The only reason we were there is because they were building some fucking, urban
sprawl shit.
Horrific apartments or whatever, right? By some conglomerate from the U.S. and possibly China. One of the two.
Yeah, surprise.
Maybe combined, I think. I remember the guy would come to the site and he'd be like, "How long is it going to take?" There'd be some cheesy guy, and it was all about the money, obviously. And in fact, we looked at 50 graves, and there was about 50 more that were left because we ran out of time, and because nobody actually cares about archaeology. But they wanted it more or less. Oh, no, put it off a second. And so whoever's living in those apartments now, much like poltergeist, they just buried over at least.
They're gonna have coffins shooting up out of their swimming pools and houses exploding, and they're here.
Yeah, just fill them up with the cement and carried on. But that was my archaeological experience.
Yes, indeed.
It was good. Oh, you're breaking up, which means I'm probably frozen.
Yeah, your audio, your video signal has broken up a little bit. Your audio is coming through good.
Actually, we went on for a very long time, so maybe we should stop pretty quick. What do you think?
As you like. I think we're coming up on 2 hours. The only question remains, what on earth you're going to say that this discussion is about? I'm thinking it could be, almost about writing, or almost everything about writing.
Okay, so it's broadly about writing.
Yeah,
it's about how sci-fi and fantasy are the ultimate forms of writing.
No,
okay, no, you don't like that.
No. This is your content, brother. I would just,
Well, hey,
I don't know. It's everything but writing. It's consideration surrounding writing.
Okay, so I brought up archaeology because
Writing plus.
No, you very early on, you were talking about archaeology, and I thought, oh, I must tell them about my archaeological experience because I'm not an archaeologist, but I got involved in it incidentally through a friend, really, and it was fascinating how it actually works, and how in the end also you could see the modern world encroaching and despoiling the whole thing. Like the guy that was the foreman was like, at the end, he was like, nobody cares about archaeology. I mean, nobody cares, and then he was like, they're not going to give us time to finish this dig, and they're going to just.
Right. The black pill of the archaeologist.
Since then, I've heard a worse story. Because this is Europe, right? So obviously, there's things here that don't exist there. There's a golf course that was being made not far from here as well, and my father-in-law just told me that he knows for a fact that when they were producing the whatever hole it was for this golf course. Not only did they find some skeletons, but they found a skeleton sitting on a throne, and they covered it up and built the course over top of it because they were told by the people building this golf course that's
they didn't want their investment locked up for years while they dusted off the bones of the kings beneath the mound.
Yeah, despite the possibility of treasure and the rest of it, it was like nope. Those concerns are nothing.
Yeah, and I mean, look at this. I mean, the bottom line. I mean, there are arguments for why the state intervention dimension causes problems. Because if I had purchased that land in order to put buildings up on it, and I knew that if I found the treasure, I'd get to keep some proportion of it, I might be motivated to stop, pause, and see what's there. I might be, but knowing that it's going to be considered patrimony for the country, and you're going to have to turn it over to the state. And then I have a different attitude about it. Now, I'm not positive what the laws are. I did look in England, and apparently if you're like a detectorist, and you're checking on your own property and, you find a silver hoard, apparently they do have to compensate you for it as it goes to the museum. But it does have to go to the museum. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I get your point. Yeah, it's a sad situation. A lot of archaeologists complain about that. Lots. I think it's pretty much universal that nobody cares, and they never have time.
That was my one little dalliance with that world. I was not an archaeologist, but
I like the image. I can see you with like a wineskin, slung over your shoulder, taking manly drafts of red wine at intervals during the day, wielding your shovel and laughing at the effeminate little archaeology students who can't make whatever that's.
Some of them had studied it for years, and they were like little. I kept, and I tried to help them. There was an Italian guy and a Danish guy that were both very sort of, God, I hope they're not watching this. There's no way they are. But they were like, weak, frankly. And
little noodle arms. You're like, no, the Italian guy wield the shovel like this.
He kept repeatedly leaving like the wheelbarrow full of dirt up above his head, and the whole thing would collapse on his head. And you always hear him yelling out like, attention, he would say, and the fucking wheelbarrow would fall on top of him full of dirt. And there's this little Danish kid. He was quite young, but God, he was let me tell you this. His favorite music of all time was the soundtrack to The Lion King. And I've never heard anybody say such a thing to me, like personally. I was so affronted and so, Jesus, kid.
It makes me want to make my Robert De Niro face,
Yeah, and it was like, you cannot do that.
It's kind of gross.
The soundtrack to The Lion King? Like, what the fuck?
It's at least it wasn't My Little Pony.
Denmark. Well, it was just.
We're screwed if we have to go to war and the young people have to defend us these days. We're fucked, man. We're all going to learn to speak Chinese.
That's what reminds me of like Frank Herbert, another great sci-fi author. Where it was about prescience. It was about trying to observe and predict the future and survive your way through it.
Absolutely.
I believe more in that.
The best prize, is to simply continue to exist for as long as you can.
Yeah.
He who laughs last laughs longest.
Well, you seek advantage where you can. You seek advantage where you can.
Absolutely. You seek advantage where you can. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I'll tell you what,
Right.
whatever you have going on, you got some sort of tumo ability, this ability to like externalize heat at the surface of your body in order to protect you against the cold. I think that's some
I'm
northern.
cold. I am a fucking cold. I'm going to go inside now. Like,
It's some sort of
there's
northern
a
European.
raccoon skull.
Nice.
Mm.
Nice. They actually still have wildlife in Ireland then.
No, I got that in New York, along with a tiny. It's up there. I don't know if I can show you. Here, maybe I can show you. It's a tiny Allosaurus in a fraction of the size, 1/20th, I believe, in resin. Hold on. Can you see that?
Ah, yes.
It's up there.
Yes. Nice.
It looks like an Allosaurus. That's what it is.
Yeah, it looks like you have yourself a proper man cave there.
I do.
It beats the American garage, and having built it
built it
with
cover.
your own hands.
I'm painting the cover for my new science fiction. That's the cover.
Oh, very cool.
So far.
Wow. And this is that first book that you wrote, or you've done subsequent?
No. I've written a book about art, and it's on my. It's a nonfiction, and that was.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen you have a notice for that or whatever on your Twitter page.
I pin tweet, yeah, and it's done more or less. It's done because I didn't go with a publisher. I can make some money. I have made some money. To be honest, yeah.
You don't have to sell as many copies when you get to keep the majority of the money.
Yeah, that's another thing you brought up early on. It was like I actually had an offer from a publisher to print it, but it was like, and I was like, so you're going to take this much money out of it? Like, what's the advantage for me to use you as a publisher? And they were honest enough to say nothing other than to say that you have a publisher.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, you can reach probably more people. That I bet you have more Twitter followers on your account than they do as a publisher. So it's like,
I do.
Who are they going to reach? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, all that they're going to be able to give you is distribution and exposure. And in this day and age, it's like, check please.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So my science fiction is about a future where the Roman Empire never ended, basically. But it's very kind of philosophical, Neoplatonist, and there's like, I don't know. Anyways, that's
are there sword fights?
There is actually. Yes, there is.
Yes, any book that doesn't have sword fights in it is not worth fuck all as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a gunfight can stand in for it, but absolutely ideal.
Homer would agree. Crom, exactly. Yeah, you are basically Homer's reincarnation in the modern world. Probably.
That's me, man.
Talk about hell.
Yeah. No pressure.
You're against the oral tradition. You're like, fuck the oral tradition.
Yeah, and
symbols. Yeah, I must have symbols.
I'm not obviously a talented writer like that. I'm like, no pressure, dude. Compare me to fucking Homer. Now, like anything anybody ever reads from me is going to seem like shit.
Well, no, Homer in the sense of, you're definitely.
He was supposed to be blind, like Tiresias, right? Wasn't Homer supposed to be the blind poet? I can still see.
Yeah.
Happily.
Well, you're unique, let's say. I mean, who else is like you, or me, or nobody's like. What the fuck am I talking about?
Happily, yes. We are as we are. Sui generis, one should hope.
Not arrogant, but
I mean, to think about it, we settle at the very outset this whole confusion about gauntlets versus bracers.
Yeah, I still want to call it a gauntlet. Although, I have to fix that in my book. I mean, Jesus, if that's true.
Well, have a look at bracer. Bracer, Bracer. Like bracers of defense +2.
The
Dungeons and Dragons first edition.
Thoth is a big culminating god in my book, to be honest. Thoth, the one you called Zeus.
I did not. Plato called him Thuth, damn it. I did not do that. I'm simply reading how it look at Phaedrus, and you will see that it is spelled Theuth. That is not my innovation. I am not responsible for it.
Okay.
Clearly.
All right. I'm shivering from the cold, so I'm going to go inside.
Well, I thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to talk to you as always. Happy to come on anytime you feel like picking my brain about some subject. And I will add in a closing. Good luck with your book. I look forward to seeing it once it's out.
Oh, thanks. And same to you and all your projects. Are you working? What's the book you're working on right now?
2 things. One is the three, but two in the immediate future. One is the Circassian translation that I mentioned to you, of the old book on Marx and science that I'm translating from Ottoman. I'm getting close to done finally after years and years. And the second is a book on the semiotics of nationalism. The third, that is a little bit further back in line, that will come up later, is I believe I'm going to be doing some science fiction that is quote unquote nationalist. And so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, that's it for me at present.
Right. And I just have the one.